little bit of an impromptu. I'm going to call this Scott's top 10 travel tips for when going to Alaska. I just kind of made that up right now. So Scott's top 10 travel tips when you go to Alaska by car. Tip number 1 is the time of year. We went through May and June, and I think that was a really good time of year to go. I mean, I feel like you can do Alaska in the winter or in the summer. This was the summer version of that trip, but it wasn't very busy because a lot of the kids are still in school, especially the Canadian kids. They don't get out of school till the end of June. So we were kind of in that perfect shoulder season before this family started kind of filling up these areas. And towards the end of our trip, as we started getting into, well, we were into June, you could really tell that the more touristy areas were a lot more heavily populated. So I'm really glad of the time of year we chose to do this. Tip number 2, grab yourself a bike. I wasn't a mountain biker at all. I never really understood the appeal of it. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. It is super flat here. Mountain biking is not really a thing. But I just kept on hearing about all the amazing mountain biking that northern BC has, Alaska, the Yukon, and so me and my buddy, we both kind of agreed we should grab mountain bikes. We went on Craigslist in Vancouver. We both found a bike, figured out how we were going to strap them to the backs of our vans, and yeah, I think it was the best decision we made the entire trip. This trip turned in from just an Alaskan sightseeing trip to almost a Alaskan mountain biking trip. It became kind of the focus and the goal. Wherever we stopped, we were looking for places that had good mountain biking trails, and we downloaded this app called Trail Forks that kind of made it easy for newbies like us to find the places and make sure we didn't get too far in over our heads. So tip number 3, be prepared for mosquitoes. Even though I do come from an area where we do have a ton of mosquitoes, and I don't think mosquitoes were any worse than where I'm from, but they definitely were a problem. So just be prepared. There is a lot of mosquitoes, especially at this time of year. So tip number 4, don't be in a rush. There was some days where we'd only drive, like we'd think we were going to drive all day and put on some real miles, and we'd only drive 1 or 2 hours. I think from the time we left Vancouver, I think it took us almost 2 weeks just to get out of BC and into the Yukon. And when you look at it, I mean, you could probably do that in 2 or 3 days, but there was just so much we wanted to see and places we wanted to check out that we didn't have a timeline. We weren't in a rush. So we just did our best to just kind of, if we saw something we wanted to stop, even though we hadn't put on many miles that day, we didn't feel bad about stopping. We just stopped and spent the night. Tip number 5 is try to caravan if possible. I know this isn't a necessity, and 99% of my travel is done solo with Ellie in the van. But something about this trip, it was pretty cool to share it with some other people. Just at the end of a long day of driving, finding a campsite together, someone making the fire, the other person cooking dinner, and just getting to kind of reminisce on the day you just had. It was kind of a neat trip to do with someone because not a lot of people get to experience this kind of adventure. So even if you want to tell people who haven't had the opportunity to go on it, when you're telling them these stories, they don't quite really understand if they weren't there. So having someone to do this trip together with made it pretty cool, and I think part of the experience for me. Okay, so what are we on? Tip number 6. So what could be tip number 6? Oh, I know. Tip number 6 is bring stuff to make fires. Bring fire starter, matches, hatchet, lighter, axe, paper, kindling, whatever you think you're going to need to start a fire. Don't be a hero and try to be that guy that makes a fire by banging rocks together. It's not worth it. I mean, it rained a ton when we were up in northern BC and Alaska. The wood was always wet. We were always able to get a fire going because we had the right tools, but if we didn't have fire starter and things like that and some cardboard and paper, there's no chance we would have had a fire a lot of these nights. So at the end of the day, it was really nice to have the fire to stand around. So just bring the stuff to make the fire. Like I said, don't be a hero. No one cares if you can make a fire by banging rocks together. Tip number 7, go to Dawson City. Dawson City in the Yukon. It's a pretty fun little town. If you do go to Dawson City, have a tow shot. It is kind of a touristy thing to do, but at the end of the day, you had the tow shot. and you get the certificate. Your name's in the book. Tip number 8 is don't be afraid to take the touristy photos. You know, the photos that look something like this? It's so easy to just drive by all of these cool things that you see. And on this trip, it is really hard to take a bad photo because the landscape is just unbelievable. But just stop and take the time, because going back through these photos, I mean, it kind of became a bit of a game. It's like, are we going to stop and take a picture at this sign? And looking back now, I'm glad that we have all these photos, because it's part of the trip. It's those kind of candid moments that when you're looking back through it, it kind of instantly transports you back to that place in time. I remember when we got the Northwest Territories picture, this one, it just started raining. You could hardly see. There I am. I'm fumbling around in the back of the van with the tripod and the self-timer. I've got my van lined up. I open the sliding door with the camera set up in the van, run out of the van. We stand in front of it, click, 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 run back in the van, make sure one of them looks good, and on we go. And I don't know, these touristy photos, they're easy not to take, but just take them. You won't regret it. Tip number 9 is talk to the locals. You can find a lot of information online, but there's only so much information online. And a lot of the stuff that's online is the super popular stuff that everyone's going to be doing. And a lot of that stuff, there's a reason it's popular, is because it is super interesting and something you should definitely stop and do. But if you talk to locals, sometimes you find some hidden gems that are not in any of the guidebooks or on any of the top 10 blog posts you read about a location you're in. So stop, talk to people at the gas stations, check out the restaurants, the pubs, the bars. That's where you're really going to find out the things that the locals like to do and places they recommend that you check out when you're driving through. All right, that was tip number 9. So we made it to tip number 10. I'm just going to make something up for tip number 10. Oh, I got one. If you go during May, June, there's this thing called solstice. And for those of you that don't know, the solstice is there's 2 solstices. There's the longest day of the year and the shortest day of the year. For us, we were there for the longest day of the year in Chicken, Alaska, which means the sun doesn't set, it doesn't get dark out. So yeah, if you ever see me in person, maybe ask me about my solstice story in Chicken, Alaska, that involves a Suburban with 12 people in it, a lot of guns, a fire, and I feel like it was almost a 2-hour each way car ride down a gravel road to location unknown. And that kind of goes back to my previous tip about talking to the locals. So yeah, solstice is definitely something that's kind of a neat experience when you're up in Alaska and the sun doesn't set. So yeah, if you made it this far in the video and you enjoyed it, found any of this information helpful, or have any questions, I would really appreciate it if you let me know in the comments below any of the questions that you might have, or if you gave me a little clickaroo on the like and subscribe button. Just right there, just give it a little click.